Welcome again to the Cult of Honesty, and hopefully we can have a wonderful conversation tonight. I would like to talk to you first, Joey, because I think it's important that we understand that the Cult of Honesty is about, in a sense, moving people forward, getting the conversation going. Unfortunately, I don't think that some people are keeping up with the discussion. I had a young man drop by our home the other day, and he told me he had been listening to everything that we're talking about, and he's more convinced now that it's really good and righteous for God to send two she-bears out to maul children to death.
Oh, well, he's just being spiteful.
Maybe so. But I'm just really at a loss for words, in a sense, when people start talking about that, because they want to continue the conversation that God is this one. Whatever He does is right, and if we do the same thing that He does, it's wrong. And so I think that we're making a lot of progress in some areas with some people, and then I think that we're going backwards in a sense with some people. But so it is what it is.
Often theists treat their children the same way that God treats us. They can argue all that they want, that we don't have any right to question God, and that He can do things that we can't, and that's okay. But when you take that argument and you shift it over to the human parent-child relationship, and the father is allowed to act certain ways and do certain ways that the child is not, and he scolds the child for their lack of ethics or misbehavior, and yet does things that the child can't. That's how they justify that.
That's true. One of the things that I'm thankful about, that is, here at the Cult of Honesty, we're not relegated to simply dealing with religious topics. And I'm thankful that we can move on and talk about something that possibly is much more meaningful, that is, to us today. So without hesitation, Greg Bray and all of you guys, Bob Graves, welcome to the Hangout tonight.
All right, let's bring them up.
Thank you. I propose that we only refer to it when making a statement like that as "Welcome to the Cult." For the record, I think specifically given the massive number of atheist men in this one, it would be excellent to introduce it in that way every time. That's do I get a second? Anyone? Motion has been made. All right. And quick call for ayes. Motion passes because my vote is the only one that counts.
I thought we could just call it. I thought we could just call it CAW, since that's the acronym. And then we'd sound like a
co.
Co. Okay. All right. I wanted to sound like a Klingon cult. Anyways, Greg, what are our topics today?
Well, we've been bouncing a few of them around. I, of course, think that the best topic, not only because it was my idea, but is the topic that Bob and I got to discussing a bit on Inspiring Honesty this last Sunday, the question of what pieces of literature or art have been significant to molding who you are, and sort of in that way, if you could create a canon of some sort, what do you think would be absolutely necessary to be in it, if anything? We've also had Alex, who is joining us for the first time for the Hangout this week, gave us the suggestion of we quite often discuss Iron Age religions, but is it possible that we're not seeing potential modern ones? With some elaboration on that, but I can allow him to elaborate. And then a few other random ones.
Your topic will lead nicely into Alex's topic.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Should we tackle that? Otherwise, I have this big book of quotes that was fun. I was just flipping through it, and I got some great ones in here. I'm a big fan. We're going to have to do that someday, because I never realized how fun it can be to just say a quote and start a conversation.
So a modern canon, we're going to dismiss the question of should we even be doing that, and just assume that we should, because we don't want to ruin our fun, and talk about what books we would put in such a canon.
Well, let me, I guess, open a little bit more of the context of that. Is the thing that led me into it is I read a quote last Sunday that it was about the existential issue of death to an atheist, and it was one of the most profound and moving quotes I have ever read on that topic. And that's something that it really does cause a lot of struggle for non-believers in many cases. And the fact that I had never seen it anywhere before made me think to so many Bibles and things that I've seen that have the little index in the front, and it's like, if you're dealing with loss, if you're dealing with addiction, if you're dealing with, abuse, any number of myriad things, they have sort of a list of, or an index of places to go look in the Bible, and it's fun to do that because most of them don't actually make sense, but I really thought that it might be worthwhile to try to put something like that together with,
Well, are you going to read is the
texts.
quote you're talking about long, or are you going to read it?
It would take me a second to find it because I didn't necessarily intend to bring that
You are
up,
the
but
master of not having things that you're going to talk about right in front of you. Do that all the time.
That's very true. I said it last weekend. Don't you have a memory for things like that?
I don't even remember you reading that last weekend. Sorry, that's my weakness.
Okay,
Okay,
I don't
so
listen to you when you talk either.
all right, so let's begin. Does anybody have any books that inspire them that they think might be a good thing to compile into a modern canon or anthology? Maybe we should call it.
It'd be important that they're varied. For example, I don't think you can leave the Bible out of a modern canon because of its tremendous influence. But I think you need to then begin to add some of the books from other cultures, Confucius, some of the, it's just that we can kind of get an overall view of some of these ancient texts that have been very influential in different cultures. I know some books I've read that were, was it Franz Kafka's, was it The Metamorphosis? Was that it? It's been a long time since I've read that. I can't recall if that's his title. We talked about, Greg, you and I, we talked about the Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
That's actually where the quote I was referring to came from. I just found it here, so I can go over it when we get there, but I don't want to cut off your thought either.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much all I was going to say, just a wide variety of things,
Yes.
My thought with it is not necessarily to include entire books either, but cuttings, snippets, things, powerful pieces. And this is one from that book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's once an elderly general practitioner consulted me because of his severe depression. He could not overcome the loss of his wife, who had died 2 years before, and whom he had loved above all else. Now how can I help him? What should I tell him? Well, I refrained from telling him anything, but instead confronted him with the question, what would have happened, doctor, if you had died first, and your wife would have had to survive you? Oh, he said, for her this would have been terrible. How she would have suffered. Whereupon I replied, you see, doctor, such a suffering has been spared her, and it was you who have spared her this suffering, to be sure, at the price that now you have to suffer and mourn her. He said no word, but shook my hand and calmly left my office. In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice.
Yeah.
That was incredibly moving to me, and I wish that I had ever heard that read at a funeral, or in, I guess, any other context. So anything like that.
That would be powerful at a funeral. I can imagine how wonderful that could be at a funeral, because we tend to say things that are more politically correct at funerals, and it's not necessarily where people are. They're grieving in ways that we don't necessarily always address, and that would be powerful.
Before we move on, I want to recognize a few new faces that we have here, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Daryl. I want to welcome Alex to our discussions here. Alex, do you want to share your last name, or should we just leave it at Alex?
No, I don't mind.
Okay.
I already said it. So.
What is it? What's your last name again?
Greco.
Okay. Very good. Well, welcome. And I also want to welcome Richard. Richard, do you mind me saying your last name? Okay. Richard's mic may not be
Richard's
on.
microphone is off.
It's off. Your mic's off.
And if there's a little
Sorry.
button up there, upper
Yeah, I've
right
got it
corner.
now. I'm sorry.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I've been sick and coughing a lot, so I figured it was more polite to leave it muted. Yeah, I'm Richard Shank.
Yeah. These are two guys that I've become a big fan of on Facebook, and I told them both that I would hurt myself if they didn't come on soon, so that worked.
You said hurt us.
And Joey, if I thought you were serious, I would have waited longer.
Who else? Are there any of the new faces that we have here, Greg? Some of our people are.
Well,
in the dark.
we have Jason Witterstrand, who's done shows with the New Covenant Group before.
Yeah,
This
he
is
was
your
here in
first
our
call to
studio.
honesty.
Yeah.
it's
Very
my
good.
first
Good to see you
Awesome.
again.
Awesome person.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. Okay, Daryl, sorry about that. Matthew Land, you almost did what you were supposed to do a minute ago, which is just to bulldog your way into the conversation, but then you had a second moment of hesitance. Daryl, what were you going to say?
I forgot what I was going to say.
All right.
No, I'm
Well,
just
since he
kidding.
forgot, I want to interject something because
He was joking.
No,
Oh,
go
you were
ahead.
joking? Okay, go for it.
Yes.
Do I still get to talk?
Yes.
Go
yes.
right ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's a wonderful idea. You know, I agree with Greg and Bob. That would be a wonderful thing to present at a funeral. And, you know, if you were to compile a lot of things like that for different, you know, to draw from at different times, depending on what you needed or what you were looking for, I think that'd be great. The only specification, I would think, and I don't think anybody here would have a problem with this, let's just don't say that these are the very words of God.
Right.
I disagree.
That's
There is
great.
no reason we need to avoid outlandish claims here. That's apparently the way that you get things to stick around for several thousand years.
Yeah.
That's true.
Dr. Jones.
Have you ever read the book by Peter McWilliams called How to Survive the Loss of Love? Anybody
No.
seen that book? It's really a book that you're supposed to read just a page a day, and he wasn't the only author, but it's just with tiny little reflective thoughts about that people go through who've either lost a love because a relationship broke up or somebody died. And it's awesome little book. Awesome little book.
Dr.
How to
Jones,
survive the loss of love.
were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to make the point that many times when I'm reading Richard's comments, and I'm thankful that he's on the program, and also Alex and Jason, many times when I'm reading the things that I find on Facebook, I think that so many times these individuals make powerful points that I would include in a canon. But I think that we need to define the canon. In other words, are we just talking about good sayings, or are we taking it back to the context by which these canons were put together? In other words, if we deal with kanun, the idea is that of a rule of thumb or a measuring stick. And that's why many people call it a standard, if you will. I'm not so sure that we would want to call anything a standard. I think that we would probably want to look at it much differently, just something meaningful. But I think many people on Facebook are saying powerful things that really would need to be included if we are looking at this as not complete writings, but just, a pericope possibly.
Useful thoughts. I don't like the word canon. Useful thoughts.
Yeah.
Canon was just a play on words for me, so I'm not, dedicated to it.
Well, we could start with Genesis and then work our way through the atheist canonization.
Which, I have this book that does that, ironically. It's the Good Book by A.C. Grayling, A Humanist Bible. Literally, it has Genesis first. I think it's hilarious that it does that, but sorry, go ahead.
There are old texts that still are demonstrably true today, like Plato's The Allegory of the Cave and the Euthyphro Dilemma. There's things that are intrinsically true, and I think that's what an atheist would, if they were going to build a book of things to go back and reflect on. It would be just the things that have been demonstrably true throughout time, and it would have to be something like that.
I'm going to go ahead and disagree with that, just for the sake of being a contrarian. Not specifically for the sake of being a contrarian, but I think that ideas that ideas that the culture has revolted against, while at the same time it has embraced, are worth putting in there. So I would put in like the introductory lectures for psychoanalysis by Freud. Not necessarily because they are adhered to now, but there was a time when they were embraced, and pretty much any style of thought that exists now is pretty much a reaction against that popularized idea of how the mind is broken down. Now, once again, I don't agree with Freudian psychodynamics, but I have to give credit to him for popularizing a way of structuring how the mind works, how the psyche exists, popularizing the idea of the unconscious and the subconscious, and a lot of fruitful ideas have come as a revolt against that. So I think that would be worth putting in there.
I mean, one thing that you're really highlighting here, Christopher, is that putting together a modern canon, we must first throw out the idea that all of the books must agree, which is something that Christians fight for when it comes to the Bible. I mean, even though all the books don't agree, they fight all, tooth and nail that there's complete agreement, there's zero contradiction. And I think a modern canon should begin first with the idea that we are not talking about a bunch of books that are all in agreement, but a bunch of building blocks that have moved our culture forward.
Yes.
Well, I think that there's also something to be said between, I guess, the concept of canon. I think what Christopher was just saying applies much better to than what I was talking about before with the useful collection of sayings or readings. I think both have a lot of value in that, but the canon, I think you hit on something marvelous with the idea of things that people should read to be sort of well-rounded and know what they're talking about. And I think historically that's very much what the Bible was thought to be as well. For many, many years, it was sort of the only reading material anybody had.
And Bob suggested that we include the Bible in the canon, and I think the canon's starting to get really, really big now. But I agree that the Bible should be included in the canon, not because I agree with the Bible, but because it was a building block that moved the human race forward in its time.
Yeah. I have a friend who actually went to a college down in Baltimore, Maryland, and his 4-year degree was based on the class went through 225 of the most influential books ever written. And that was their education. He got a 4-year degree with that. And then he went to SUNY Binghamton and then started studying physics there. It's amazing.
Did I hear somebody ask how the Bible moved our culture forward? Or was that just my echo coming back?
Didn't hear anybody ask.
Okay, I imagine that.
I think that's just your echo.
What books do you guys
Matthew,
consider to be
do you have a TV
prerequisites?
going on in your background, Matthew?
No, I do not. I'm silent.
It's probably Christopher. He always has his TV on. Always.
I'll mute your microphone, Christopher.
I'm muting it now. Until I blab, I'll mute.
What do you guys consider to be books that would be prerequisites, in your opinion?
Well, Richard Shank was going to say something. Let him say that, and then we'll address that.
Yeah, and actually that was kind of, I think it addresses that, and I was going to kind of run off of where Christopher had been going with that. I think one of the most influential books for me in the last 5 years has been Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. And I don't know, for me, it's important to understand why we think the things we think and why we believe the things we do and how easy it is for us to fall into ideas that we shouldn't. And so, yeah, I think running along those lines, having that maybe a prerequisite before you approach, other things within the canon is helpful to.
Yeah. Even books like How We Know It Isn't So. Have you ever seen that book?
I haven't yet.
Great book. It talks about the fallacies that we're so easily sucked in by.
And I think that there's something to be said by getting too specific with the books that we choose. We're all, of course, inclined that the large amount of skeptics in here are going to look and say, well, these books were really influential to me in this, but they might be a little bit too new. Like, say, the collected works of Freud that Christopher brought up, or some of the other, like the entire Bible. Might it not be better to do things that sort of make a meta-analysis of many different things? Like, for example, the book coming to my mind is Bill Bryson's Short History of Nearly Everything. Is a fantastic introduction to most of science. It just really covers a huge amount of science and why it is and how that happened, instead of assigning, textbook after textbook and course after course. Is anybody else sort of
So you think
hear me say on that, or?
so you think instead of including specific books, we should only include books that are about those books?
Well, I'm not saying only. I'm saying that might be more efficient and something worth considering if we were putting together a.
Or how about a list that was like this? You should read 5 of the following 25 books, 3 of the following 10 books. And kind of give a list of maybe 1,000 books and encourage people to read a certain number from each different section.
Yeah, because it sounds like what you're talking about is, like, for instance, Richard was just talking about Daniel Kahneman, and he kind of inspired a whole field of psychology and economics called behavioral economics that talks about heuristics and cognitive biases. And the really popular person in that field right now is Dan Ariely. So I mean, Kahneman did a lot of work with Alan Tversky, I believe is his name. So the Kahneman-Tversky research that is now popularized by Dan Ariely, that whole field, any synopsis of that field that lets you know that humans are predictably irrational, I think is kind of where Richard was going with that, because I think that's kind of the area where Kahneman got his Nobel Prize in.
Right.
But I mean, and then apply that to any other field.
So I'm wondering the direction you guys took when you saw this question, because when I saw it, I was wondering, okay, well, making a canon, but to what audience? Who's going to be reading it and to what ends? So I was thinking, okay, is it aliens or millions of years into the future that some other time machine, Morlocks, whatever, pick up the book about what humans are saying about themselves. So I think it's interesting to see how we got to certain ideas. Like you were saying, Christopher, about Freud, that agreeing or disagreeing, just how we developed, I think, is a very interesting thing. That's why including the Bible, see the mistakes that we made or the positive things that came out of that or how we evolved that way, I think is a bit of an interesting, or that's the way I took the question.
Yeah, so
It's one of the things I love about Hangouts is that we get these various people or perspectives that people bring of the different. Like, I didn't see that question the way that you brought it up at all. So that's awesome. Thank you.
One of the things that's concerned me over the years, and I keep asking the question to theists, has to do with the methods and practices, that is, of the makings of the canon that we currently have. And it disturbs me because the canon is extremely biased, and I think most of you guys would agree. So what would be our method and our practice to keep us from making another biased mistake?
I am willing to go on a limb and say that anything that we put together through the lens of history, several hundred years from now, is going to be a biased and closed-minded piece of garbage to the people who are so much more knowledgeable than we are.
Oh, sure.
I don't know
even going back to.
I don't agree.
I don't know if I could agree with that, but I would say that personally, I think the first big step is to emphasize that none of this is viewed as inerrant, because I think that's perhaps the biggest mistake that has got us so stuck today on any religious book, the Bible or the Quran or anything like that.
The one downside to ever writing any book is that your major audience is going to have access to more information than you did.
True. I also think that it's really interesting to compare just the thought process, the thought processes that we're taking here, and look at, imagining what was going on in the mind of people who put together the Bible. and see that the Bible is all about. It's very it's very focused in the sense that it's about God or Yahweh and his people, and then their journey forward in the New Testament, and it's all very much about spirituality. And the canon that's being discussed amongst the people here in this group, by comparison, it covers science, psychology, history. What else? Maybe that's it so far.
Comprehensive development.
Yeah.
When you ask the question, what were they, the mind going on, what was going on in the mind of those who put together the canon, it makes me think of Dr. Phil's very famous statement of, what were you thinking? I don't know what they were thinking, but I can't help but feel that some of it was particularly abusive, but some of it had to have been developmentally unarrived. I mean, did the people who included some of these horrible passages ever stop to think, what are people going to think of God if you tell them he did that?
But aren't we talking about people who were arguably advanced in the sense that they were coming out of a savage culture?
Advanced for their day, yes, right. And so it's hard to know exactly what they're thinking. We can't put ourselves entirely in their place because they're coming from a context we just have never lived in. And, just as if your station in life, if you're wealthy or if you're poor, you don't really understand how people on the other side live. We're over here in America. Do we really understand how people in Africa live or people in Iraq? And do we really get it? What life is like on a daily basis for the Chinese people up in Xinjiang province? We just don't know, and it's very hard for us to imagine what it was like to be in that day.
Well, Bob, I think that you're bringing up an excellent point of context, and this goes towards what Joey was just talking about. And I think the bottom line is, regardless of context, and I think Joey's bringing up the difference between the fact that a canon back in the day was solidified in the Bible, whereas nowadays we're thinking of a canon and we're using, like science and psychology. And I think the thread of continuity is understanding. Our level of understanding at the time the Bible was written was codified in the Bible. That was our level of understanding. Our level of understanding now has progressed in such a way that the kind of things written in the Bible have advanced to the point where we use different methodologies for understanding, like psychology, like science, like the epistemological philosophies that we use now that we didn't use back then. So I think that might have a reason why, that might be a reason why there's such a stark difference between what we're trying to throw in now versus what was included in the Bible back then.
Yeah. Unfortunately, today we use anchors to only keep the ship in the harbor.
I like the way you stated that, Christopher, the way you identified us with the us back then. I mean, it's a human struggle since the beginning, whenever that was.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you have ever, you probably have all heard of Patton Oswalt. He is a comedian and an atheist, and he does what, in my opinion, is a brilliant argument in favor of religion. I'm not in favor of religion, but he makes an argument that is extremely compelling that religion was, that the human race wouldn't have survived without it. I dare not try to go through his whole dialogue, but one thing that I remember him touching on was that back in that day you had very barbaric people who didn't care much for anybody else, and they could destroy you if you were weak. And there were some people who were smart but maybe not as strong, and they couldn't survive or stand up against these barbarians. But they were smart enough to invent a god and convince those people that if they didn't behave themselves and not murder them, that there was a God who would strike them down and judge them. And this, in a sense, is arguably how some of the intelligence of the human species was allowed to survive in its day, is simply
Interesting
by
argument.
bringing superstition into the equation.
Tim Oswald, you said?
Patton.
Pat Oswald.
Patton Oswalt.
Something that occurred to me as well while we were discussing this is one of the big issues that Dr. Jones spends a fair amount of time talking about is the lack of clarity of the author's original intent in writing things, and the context and sort of the linguistic aspects of the time that would be associated with this. What's cool about if we were to do something like a modern day canon, we talked about it being, or Joey mentioned it being a lot, and I mean, I have a shelf full of books right here that takes up, a decent amount of space, and it shares a fair amount of information, but realistically, it's heavy, it's clunky, it's large. Or I have a phone that I carry around with me that has an incredible amount. I mean, there's like 32 gigabytes of storage space, and it's a camera, and it connects me to the internet, and I use it to argue with strangers and look at pictures of cats. It's something that we now have the technology that we could create a canon that does include thousands or millions of documents, include videos and images and very, very high resolution images and artwork. And it could have not just a book, but interviews by the author about the book, and FAQs and things to give context to these different items, all contained within it, so that it's sort of a searchable archive that has been hand-selected to be meaningful. I mean, yes, we have the Google, but how much crap is on that? I mean, you try to find something. Me personally, especially, because I do a lot of using Google and other search engines to argue about a specific point, and I'll tell you, you have to be very, very careful with your wording, and you've got to be selective and things to even find things worth reading or citing among this huge pile of human waste.
I see that you don't understand how to talk to the Google.
I think you're making a wonderful point, Greg, and I've argued for years that if Jesus would have been videotaped, we would not have as many problems understanding his language flux. And so,
right.
Video libraries really, really are essential. That is, in understanding authors, and I'm thankful for those.
Video canon.
And so, one of the things that we are stressing here at the New Covenant Group is, with any write, W-R-I-T-E, there needs to be something connected to it, because electronically you should be able to read a book and see video clips so we can understand the intent of the author much, much better.
Wow. We can put Greg Bray's video on his presentation of evolution, which was, I thought, outstanding and very comprehensive without getting, it was only 2 hours, but I thought you covered a ton of bases and made an excellent argument. That was awesome. I wish we could isolate that somewhere and keep it in a special place where it can be accessed easily. And also, you heard it tonight, Greg told us that he can actually herd cats.
How well played, sir. Well played. I see what you did there.
All right, well, it is, we're about more than halfway through our show. I suggest that we move on to the next topic. What do you think, Greg?
Sure. I think that's a great idea. The next topic, I mean, we did sort of do a large intro into the canon, and then I think that Alex's question of modern religions, it does, you're right, sort of follow from that. Alex's specific example that he brought up was one can argue that the global go green trend can seem like a religion, with the God being earth or nature, sin being carbon footprint, not recycling, the offsetting of them being akin to the Catholic indulgences, the guilt for said sinning, both self-imposed and inflicted by others, and the threat of a terrestrial hell, aka the outcome of not being green conscious.
So Alex's question has nothing to do with modern religion in the sense of, mega churches or where religion is going these days. But are there philosophies and organizations in our modern day that are currently benign in that sense, but could evolve into something that has a religious connotation to it?
I would argue that conservatism, liberalism, Marxism, socialism, libertarianism, each one of these philosophies comes from a particular standpoint in the culture that tries to define the way things ought to be for everybody else in the culture, so that the people from whose standpoint that particular philosophy comes from feel they got a fair shake at what they would define as a fair shake. And when we see the people who deal with these issues politically, oh my goodness, this is worse than the Crusades. It's deeply religious.
I'm glad, Greg, I saw that transition too earlier, so I was smiling. I'm like, oh, great. This is a perfect transition into that topic. But I'm kind of disagreeing, I think, with what Christopher was saying earlier. I think old habits die hard. I don't think we're that much different than we were, let's say, in biblical times. We seem to still have these habits. I think it might be more maybe our tribal nature or something. But like you said, different political views, different things. There's always a different God. There's always a different outcome. There's always a different punishment or ways to, in some cases, use guilt to get emotional reactions or to start different communities and stuff. So I don't know. That's why I mentioned green specifically, because like I said, like you don't recycle a can, people will preach to you worse than any church.
There's also a fair degree of, along with the green thing, the natural or the naturopaths, the organic.
I call it the naturalistic fallacy.
Yes.
The naturalistic fallacy, where anything that has the word natural in front of it is automatically better. Never mind that poison is natural, earthquakes are natural, scorpions
I'm not sure,
are
though,
natural.
if it was a religion that they would include fallacy in the name.
I
know.
I would challenge anyone, because I question this all the time, to tell me one thing that is not natural.
Your face.
Yeah.
On
That
the
was-
spot with it.
That was
You're right. It's
I can't-
supernatural.
I can't even be sarcastic about that. That was amazing. That was an amazing burn.
No, if
Very
it weren't
quick.
natural, it couldn't be. So
Yeah,
it's,
exactly.
Oh,
You put natural vitamins by synthetic vitamins. What are we talking about here? Synthetic vitamins are made out of natural ingredients that come from
You're
the earth.
synthesizing natural ingredients, yes.
Out of what? But out of what?
Out of natural ingredients.
Right.
You're synthesizing natural ingredients. So, so I work in a laboratory that studies the psychology of the sense of smell, and so I have access to information about artificial and natural flavor components that go into foods, right? And artificial flavor components are recombined natural chemicals.
right. Particularly like esters. There's
Absolutely.
I think the only real difference between, say, natural and synthetic, the only real difference for the most part, is that the natural occurs in a multiplex and the synthetic can occur in a pure form. Whereas the flavor that comes from an apple is there with all the pulp and all the other aspects of the apple, whereas an artificial apple flavoring is, it is completely it exists in total isolation from the multiplex that the other flavoring comes in. We don't really know if that's harmful or not, in a sense. But that is one big difference between, say, the natural and the unnatural, and that is that the synthetic chemicals can be purer.
I think that in my opinion, the question that that Alex's question really brings out here is, if just because something is true, we can argue all day about what is true and what isn't, but let's assume for a moment that something is true. Does that mean that it's okay to become religious about it? To preach to somebody, or to become polemic about the point? Does the fact that you know something to be true give you the right to turn it into something that is, in a sense, religious?
All right. Just the other day with Greg and a few others on a post, we had this discussion about the definition of religion or religious. So are we defining religion or religious activity here as just the set of rituals or practices or things that you go by living, or related to the deity?
Can we swap out religious with dogmatic?
Okay, I like that.
Very good.
Because
I agree.
when you're dogmatic about things, you can be just as fervent.
And I tend to associate many times religious with the belief that there is something immaterial that is operating under the hood that produces consequences in response to things that go on top of the hood.
Matthew, nobody's going to take you seriously.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for example, many religious people will believe that if you give 10% to God, that God will somehow be at work behind the scenes to make you more profitable in your business, and you know that is to me there's something magical going on there that is different from the standard dogma that one might have. That look, you gotta learn how to protect your principle, and you gotta increase your interest. And, you know, it's a totally different attitude. So to me, some of that religious involves some of that magical thinking.
Yeah, that's
Bob,
like,
you must
I
have
think it's
missed out on Dr. Juanita Bynum's message last night on Daystar. She was telling us that if you would send in $77.
Listen, don't make Bob feel bad about it.
Well, I mean, $77 gets you a blessing. I mean,
It should have been 66.
or was it 66?
Oh, you watched
the
it 6
program?
times.
Yeah, that $11 can make a huge difference.
But I think the one of the aspects of the point, not only being dogmatic in terms of what rituals are used, but the God. I mean, well, let's say for the Go Green thing, I mean it's Gaia or Captain Planet. I prefer Captain Planet, but there is a concept of something watching over you or something that you're accountable to. I think that was the interesting thing. Like for communism, let's say the state being the God, that there is that concept of a deity there. It's not.
The Earth could be the Earth could be a conscious being, and it's reacting to us. We don't even realize it, but the Earth is regurgitating itself at us in various ways.
And some people have realized that the hard way.
Yeah. Well, my house was flooded twice, and I'll tell you, Mother Earth was angry with me. Must have been.
Captain Planet.
Well, I think it comes down to
Gaia
what you
was in
value.
Captain Planet, by the way.
Yeah, I know, and she was voiced by Oprah, wasn't it?
Really? I did not know that.
I think
That's
so.
awesome.
That's a deep cut, brother.
Oh no, wait,
That is
no, it wasn't Oprah. It was no, I think it was Oprah. I'll have to look that up.
You're right.
Wow.
Well, these are all
you
important
think-
things to know during this discussion.
That was
when it
really
comes
hard to
down to
resist a comment.
dogma,
That would've been
when it
my
comes down to
favorite.
dogma,
just
don't you
playing.
think it kind of all comes down to values, like what it is that you value, and how strongly you value it, as to whether you want other people to resonate, for that value to resonate, as to whether you cross that barrier of, okay, it's valuable to me, it must be valuable to you, therefore let me tell you about it. Isn't that kind of what it all is going to boil down to?
Perhaps, and then religion uses the magic part to coerce the value upon others with sanctions that they will suffer if they don't embrace such a value.
We do have a viewer that has made some comments here. We missed this one when it was poignant, but I did want to get back to it. It says not having all books in agreement and having no creed will keep things from becoming biased. So thank you for that. But this one is actually on this subject. It is political correctness has become religious in nature. It's to control the masses. Is that another example of this?
Yeah, that's another good way to look at what religion is, a set of ideas or philosophies that are intended to control the masses. But I guess a question that I want to ask is, if something let's begin here. If it is true that we can all do things that will destroy our planet and destroy the future of our species, then does it justify being dogmatic about it towards others?
Yes.
You think so?
Well, I think that there are things that we certainly can justify being to a degree dogmatic about. Things like reality. I think it would make a huge hypocrite out of me if I did not recognize that it's okay, or at least to recognize that my position is it's okay to be dogmatic about reality, because I get really down on people's cases for denying reality or making things up or being incredibly anti-reality.
Okay.
Well,
let me ask another question then. Does getting dogmatic with an individual about anything, is it productive towards changing their minds toward your philosophy?
It might be. When a person is dogmatic, just because somebody's dogmatic, I mean, I would wish that we were all, healthy enough that we can deal with somebody who's dogmatic. Just because somebody's dogmatic and very, very convinced and very persuaded of something, wonderful for them. I don't have any obligation to join them in their perspective without having good cause and reason, and I should be able to feel good enough about myself and feel solid enough in my own self that somebody else being dogmatic is irrelevant to whether or not I'm going to join in. So I mean, people can be dogmatic if they want to, but when they threaten with other forms of force, I think there's a serious problem there. But dogmaticism in itself is not necessarily a problem, except for the people who are very much intimidated by it.
And I also think it's a matter of relativism too. Not that everything is relative, or well, not that everything's not relative, but I mean, it's kind of like one person's dogmatism isn't. A person doesn't have to be dogmatic all the time. Like, you can run into somebody and they could be neutral for all intents and purposes, and then you can get on a conversation about something that you're just particularly lax about, that they, relatively speaking, are dogmatic about, that they didn't seem dogmatic about until you got into that conversation about that particular topic. And compared to somebody else, they might not be dogmatic about it, but because you're so maybe chill about it, their dogmatism is more exaggerated.
This sounds like
I mean, this is why I had to make the appeal to reality, is because it's not uncommon. As a matter of fact, it happens at least once or twice a week when somebody tells me I'm dogmatic, I'm closed-minded, I just need to open my mind or consider this. I need to open my heart and let God in, or I'm closed, or I've been indoctrinated by the state, or I don't know. I get into arguments about all kinds of different things that, everything from politics to religion to economics to other controversial topics in science. I was arguing with Bob today about the genetically modified organisms, and he's wrong.
You sound dogmatic.
And we probably
so
are both
dogmatic.
very dogmatic about that, and yet, I'm sure that what I had to say is not impressing Greg, and Greg knows that what he's saying is not necessarily impressing me. But it's just the way it is. Well, yeah, I know.
I sense some pain here. Do we need to work something out?
But the thing is that it's really, in some sense, irrelevant. So the dogmatism there is it's wonderful that Greg can champion that. But
Champion, I think, is a good word for that, because it really is. I mean, there's a difference between being dogmatic in sort of a righteous indignation sort of a sense, where you are going out and simply judging people, or condemning them, or in any other respect writing them off because they disagree with you, or being a champion of those things that you believe to be true and actively trying to engage the conversations on it. This is where I I believe it was Penn Jillette, discussed how he doesn't have respect for people who or theists, believers who don't evangelize or proselytize, or he doesn't any of them that believe in any sort of eternal damnation, especially because, frankly, if you think that you have this information, if you're right about this, and everybody who doesn't know it and believe in it and accept it is going to burn forever in eternity, it's basically your moral responsibility to talk about that and nothing but that as often as you can to try to get people to understand. I mean, if we apply this in the practical level, if you happen to know that there's a door that leads to an 8-story drop and it has no sign or signage or anything, and you see people walking towards it, it's kind of on you to tell these people that that's what's coming up. Otherwise, their blood is on your hands. So I have to say championing it is not quite the same thing as being dogmatic in that respect.
Greg, have you ever heard of Ray Comfort?
I have. I understand.
$5 a year about
makes
this.
like mattresses or something. Bananas. That's what he makes.
We have about 3 minutes left in the show, and so we need to climax this somehow. And so let's give our final comments.
I want to comment on what Greg just said. I like what you said, Greg. You know, if we are dogmatic about something, we should just champion it instead of trying to force it upon others. You know, put something out there in the way of proof so that people can test it for themselves, you know.
And I wanted to qualify on that one that this is where, I mean, Bob brought up championing, and I think that we're both championing a position in the debate we're having about genetically modified organisms, but that is the other part of it is that Bob is wrong. So when the champions fight, there will be a winner, I think, in the long run. At least, you know, even if it doesn't come to the death or a concession, the crowd knows who won, right, Bob? So,
by the time you have killed us all, we will know.
I think the same is true with Ray Comfort. You know, he champions this idea, and because it's important to him, and he's very, very obviously quite wrong about it to anybody who really knows what they're talking about for many of the points that he makes. But he's passionate about it, and he goes to bat for it over and over and over. It's like watching Rudy almost.
I don't get it. I got to be honest with you, I don't get it. I mean, I've seen people who are slick and smooth and this and that, but I watch Ray Comfort. He strikes me as being a guy who's sort of dumb as rocks. I don't understand how anybody follows him. I mean, I watch him and I say, what's the charm? How does it come across? I don't get it. You know,
mustache.
I don't get whatever. I don't really get it.
Bob, I think it's the old fire and brimstone idea. Some people think that's a good thing, you know. We need to get back to that, you know. Doesn't make sense. I'm not saying it makes sense.
Jason, Matthew, Richard, do any of you guys have anything to? Hey, we've sort of dominated you guys out of the conversation for a while. Or Jeremy, I don't know if you're at the. Oh no, AFK right now. So, any of you three?
No, I'm good. We don't have time for a 3-day hangout.
Yeah, we do. We just stopped broadcasting it. We stick around. I've got another hour at least.
I don't.
Oh, you people with jobs and lives and things.
Jason has no time for you, Greg.
Matthew, Richard?
Well, as far as, you know, the dogma goes, to me, the danger that I see in it is oftentimes when you're dogmatic, you've closed off the possibility of any other information getting into your mind. And sometimes that's good. I mean, there are some things that we absolutely know that really there is no point, you know, rehashing. But to me, that's always the danger I'm afraid of with myself, is if I get dogmatic about something that I've closed off the possibility of maybe not having the full story. So that's an area where I try to be cautious. Probably not always successful, but
I think that also, sorry I keep doing this, but is another reason that championing is a good idea, is because sometimes it's important to see your champion lose, and to recognize that you kind of need to change his tactics, or maybe get a new champion. Right, Bob?
Sure, as you would well know. Yes.
Oh. That's what I've got. I know. I do.
This is getting
I
ugly, guys.
Significant about that.
No,
There's a reason to keep putting the ideas out there. I mean, I engage people in conversations, discussions, and debates all over the board. And I know it's hard to believe, but there have been times where I have had my champion very, very clearly and obviously defeated before my eyes, and I've had to give up on him. And you know, that's a good thing in the long run. It culls the herd, at least.
Bob,
So-
now you know what I have to put up with in Clash Course.
Yes, right, exactly. But I'll tell you, not every champion is perfect, and they don't need to be. I still admire Einstein, even though we found there's some ways in which he was wrong. But what a mind that he was to break through the barriers that he broke through.
All right, Alex, do you have any closing comments?
No, I think I'm good. I think that I probably am dogmatic when I speak to people, but I'm trying, I guess, to be a little bit more flexible, just to see where they're coming from or how people got to a certain belief system or understanding. But I think I'm becoming a little bit more flexible. Not that my opinions would change, but maybe more patient.
Yeah.
Also, I'm really worried about this GMO thing, Bob. I have to check out this conversation. I'm losing a champion before my eyes.
I think that there are shades of dogmatism, and I certainly appreciate having people around me that don't think like I do. It was having those people around me that helped me to walk away from religion, and so why would I want to stop that now? I think we can go too far. Have we made the round in the hangout, Dr. Jones?
I think so.
Okay.
Good.
Well, unless anybody has anything else to say, we're going to pull the hangouts down now. So you've got about 2 seconds to object. Go ahead and pull them down, Ricky. And Dr. Jones, I'll let you close the show.
I think it's interesting to get into the whole idea of the remaking of a canon, but I think that in a sense we have this ongoing. We have, let's say, librarians, people collecting all different kinds of writings and putting them together for purposes of being used, something that's beneficial and useful. And so I think that is important. I think it's also important for us to realize that the internet is a wonderful place to go, because it has become extremely transparent, and you really don't have a beginning or an end to this in a sense, and so it's opening up information. And to me, I think that the best kind of canon that we can have is something that, in a sense, that is all-inclusive. And I think the Apostle Paul was probably right when he was talking about, all literature inspires teaching of some kind. It gives us the ability to look at it in the context of a mistake or learning opportunity of some kind, or benefit and move forward. And so I'm thankful to have this conversation tonight. Well, this has been the Cult of Honesty once again, and you've heard those people from the cult. And so we do thank you for your time.